He ran a creepy little antique shop in Kansas City. He wore glasses, spoke softly, and seemed harmless. But behind closed doors, he was drugging, torturing, and killing young men, turning his home into a human slaughterhouse. And nobody suspected a thing until one victim jumped from a window wearing nothing but a dog collar. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 1949, the year Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. was born in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. At first glance, he looked like any other boy, quiet, glasses too big for his face, and the kind of kid who didn't quite fit in anywhere. But no one could have predicted the evil that would eventually grow inside him. As a child, Berdella was deeply introverted. He didn't play outside much. He didn't laugh like the other boys. What he did instead was observe, silently. He watched people. He memorized how they moved, how they spoke, how they reacted when uncomfortable. It wasn't curiosity, it was preparation. By the time he was 5, Robert's father had already begun shaping his world through violence. He was a strict Catholic who believed discipline came through pain. Berdella was beaten, regularly, emotionally distant, and when his father died of a sudden heart attack, when Robert was just 16, it broke him. He stopped pretending to be normal after that. After high school, he enrolled in the Kansas City Art Institute. At first it seemed like he might finally have a future. He was intelligent, well-spoken, and could draw with eerie precision. But it didn't take long for that darkness to seep in. Fellow students said he was arrogant. He bragged about torturing animals. One class project allegedly involved cooking a live duck. Yes, cooking it alive for the sake of artistic expression. Another involved drugging a dog and painting it. Even in the permissive 1970s art world, people started whispering, there's something not right about him. He didn't graduate. He dropped out, but the damage was already done. Now free from school and from structure, Berdella created his own world, one where he had all the control. He opened an odd little shop called Bob's Bazaar. Bazaar, a cluttered storefront in Kansas City, filled with antiques, occult books, and skull-themed collectibles. It looked like something out of a horror film, and it attracted all the right people, the vulnerable, the curious, the broken. Behind the counter, Berdella wore thick glasses and spoke in a soft, almost effeminate tone. He seemed harmless, kind, even, but he wasn't. He was watching, choosing. You see, Berdella was obsessed with dominance. He didn't want love. He didn't want companionship. He wanted ownership. The idea of someone being completely at his mercy, unable to move, unable to speak without permission, thrilled him. He was fascinated by the concept of turning a person into a puppet, a thing. His shop was a front, his public face, but his real life was happening behind the walls of 4315 Charlotte Street, a modest 2-story house in a quiet Kansas City neighborhood. The curtains always drawn, the air always stale, and the basement always locked. It started in 1984 when Berdella took in a 19-year-old man named Jerry Howell. Jerry had been in trouble with the law. He was vulnerable. Berdella promised to help him. Instead, he drugged him, then he tied him down. And over a span of 28 hours, he did things to him that were so brutal, even seasoned investigators years later refused to read the details out loud. Jerry didn't survive, but Berdella wasn't satisfied. That first murder didn't scare him, it excited him, so he kept going. He got better at hiding the bodies, better at lying, and every time he killed, he wrote everything down in disturbing, emotionless detail, like he was a scientist cataloging specimens. He even took Polaroids, hundreds of them. To the outside world, he was just a quirky shop owner, maybe a little weird, but harmless. But behind those walls, a predator was evolving, a man who never screamed, who never acted violently in public, who smiled when he shook your hand. But once he had you alone, you never came out. Robert Berdella wasn't just a serial killer, he was a collector, and his collection had only just begun. (1985). By now the house on Charlotte Street had become a tomb of secrets. The furniture never moved, the blinds never opened, the neighbors didn't ask questions, and Robert Berdella liked it that way. Each victim was a test run for something darker, something more refined. The process was always evolving. More chemicals, new restraints, stronger sedatives. He didn't just kill to kill, he wanted control. Absolute, humiliating, soul-breaking control. After Jerry Howell, Berdella waited, He wasn't careless. He picked targets who wouldn't be missed. Runaways, hustlers, drifters. That's how he found his second victim, Robert Sheldon, a quiet, troubled man in his early 20s. Berdella offered him a place to crash. That was his trick, appearing helpful. He always seemed generous, friendly. But Sheldon wasn't there 24 hours before Berdella decided he was going to become property. And then came the sedation, then the gags, then the restraints, and finally, the procedures. Because that's how Berdella saw it. Procedures. Experiments. He performed them with calculated cruelty, applying drain cleaner to vocal cords, injecting caustic substances into limbs, and recording every step in neat handwriting like a twisted medical journal. Robert Sheldon didn't survive the week. Berdella dismembered his body in the bathtub, wrapped the pieces in trash bags, and placed them out with the garbage, just like that. Another human being, reduced to refuse. But it didn't stop. The next was Mark Wallace, another drifter who had once done yard work for Berdella. He showed up during a thunderstorm, looking for shelter. Berdella invited him in with a smile, then waited until he was asleep. The pattern repeated: sedation, binding, pain, photography. This time, Berdella focused on sensory overload. He played loud music, shined bright lights in Wallace's eyes, and left him restrained in unnatural positions for hours. Wallace died of asphyxiation after prolonged torture. His body shut down from the trauma. Another line in the notebook, another name erased from the world. Then came James Ferris, a man Berdella had known for years. This time, the torture spanned over 2 full days, with agonizing breaks in between. Berdella was learning how to prolong suffering without killing too quickly. And all of it, every twisted experiment was documented. What drugs were used, what tools, what reactions, what cries. To Berdella, this wasn't murder. It was science, his own sick brand of it. By the time he took Todd Stoops, things had become even more sadistic. Stoops was a former sex worker. Berdella had helped once in the past, but in Berdella's home, that past didn't matter. Stoops was kept alive for nearly 2 weeks, his body slowly mutilated and broken down. 2 full weeks. Berdella wrote that Stoops had resistance in the beginning, but by the end, he was compliant. That was the goal. Not death, not even pain. Obedience. Berdella didn't want to kill immediately. He wanted his victims to submit. That was the real high. The sickest part? He felt no guilt. He went to work, paid bills, ran his shop, made jokes with neighbors, and when he came home, he picked up right where he left off. A double life so perfectly hidden, it's terrifying. His home had a routine now, a ritual. The basement for storage and sedation, the second-floor bedroom, the torture chamber, the bathroom dismemberment and disposal, the backyard or garbage cans, final destination. He had a system, and he perfected it over the years, but no matter how careful he was, evil always leaks out eventually. He started getting sloppy, slower, more arrogant. His notes became bolder. He thought he'd never get caught. After all, who would suspect a soft-spoken shop owner who collected antiques and volunteered for community watch? He even mocked the police once in a shop conversation, saying the city could use a good mystery again, like the old days. No one knew he was creating one, victim by victim, right under their noses. By 1988, there were at least 6 men who had entered that house and never come out, but Berdella wasn't done yet. He was about to bring home Christopher Bryson, and this time, something would go wrong, something that would blow the entire horror wide open. By 1988, Robert Berdella wasn't just killing. He was documenting, studying, cataloging. Each victim wasn't a person to him. They were projects, experiments, entries in his growing archive of torment. He kept meticulous records, scribbled in notebooks with dates, times, and reactions. His handwriting was clean, organized. He used symbols to mark different kinds of torture, and not once did he express regret. Next to the journals were Polaroids, hundreds of them, men tied to beds, men bruised, broken, gagged, photos taken mid-torture, some during sedation, others right before death. And in each frame, the subject looks like they know this is the end, their eyes hollow. To Berdella, these photos weren't trophies. They were proof of power, evidence of control, visual bookmarks for when he wanted to relive the moment without getting his hands dirty again. And just like any collector, he had rules. He only targeted men. They had to be vulnerable. He had to control the moment they lost their will to fight. He tracked how long each project survived, how much pain they endured, how they reacted to different chemicals, shocks, or restraints. This wasn't murder for him. This was about absolute dominance, breaking another person until they weren't even human anymore. But the longer his experiments went on, the sloppier he became. And then came Christopher Bryson. Bryson was a male sex worker, and Berdella used the same method he always did: offer help, bring him home, drug him. But from the moment Bryson woke up in that nightmare of a house, something was different. Berdella tied him to a bed, placed dog collars and electrodes on his body, and blindfolded him. Then he began his routine, administering tranquilizers, shocking him with electricity, forcing him to beg, writing it all down in his journal. But Bryson was clever. He didn't scream. He didn't resist too fast. He watched. He listened. He waited. He noticed Berdella had a pattern. After torture, he would bring food. He would talk, sometimes even laugh, as if nothing had happened. He liked to pretend he wasn't doing anything wrong. Bryson played along, told Berdella he was starting to trust him, that maybe they could be friends. It worked. Berdella loosened the ropes, just slightly. That night, he left a pack of matches in the room by mistake. Bryson hid one under the mattress. On the fourth day, Berdella left the house to make a phone call. That was Bryson's moment. He burned through the ropes with the match and hurled himself from the second-floor window, still naked, bleeding, and wearing a dog collar. He hit the ground hard, but he ran until a meter reader spotted him and called 911. Within minutes, the police were at Berdella's house, and what they found inside was not just incriminating, it was soul-destroying. They uncovered over 300 Polaroids of his victims, torture logs and journals spanning years, human remains, bones, teeth, and skull fragments, restraints, syringes, chemical bottles, and electrocution devices, a freezer filled with suspicious meat and tissue, a rotting human skull in a closet. And that was just day one. Each room had a purpose. Each item had a story. It was clear this was not spontaneous violence. This was ritual, routine, purpose. When they confronted Berdella, he acted cold, calm, even smug. He didn't deny the accusations. He just said, "You'll find what you find." He knew it was over. But what shocked investigators wasn't just what he did. It was how he lived while doing it. Neighbors had no clue. He paid his bills. He made casual jokes at work. He attended local business meetings. He even called the police on someone for stealing from his shop while human remains were sitting in his basement. This wasn't some wild-eyed lunatic. This was a functioning predator, living among ordinary people, perfectly hidden by the mask of normal. In the end, 6 men were confirmed dead. But there were more Polaroids than victims identified, more journal entries than names on record. Robert Berdella didn't just take lives, he erased them, and yet somehow he avoided the death penalty. That part of the story still enrecords people to this day. April 2nd, 1988. Kansas City police stood in front of 435 Charlotte Street with a warrant in hand and a survivor's statement burned into their minds. Christopher Bryson had described the house from the inside in terrifying detail. The ropes, the Polaroids, the drugs, the collar around his neck. He told them where Berdella kept his tools, how long the abuse lasted, and even how he tricked Berdella into loosening the ropes. Most victims never got the chance. Bryson's escape wasn't just lucky, it was a miracle. And when police walked into that house, they expected to find evidence. They were not prepared for what they uncovered. The moment officers opened the door, they were hit with a wave of rot, stale air, decay, chemicals, a smell that clung to their clothes and never quite left. They searched room by room. Every step revealed something worse than the last. In one drawer, a human skull. In the freezer, packages of flesh, wrapped in plastic like leftovers. In the basement, blood-stained rags, ropes, and a rusty iron pipe still bent at the ends. Then they found the photos. Hundreds of Polaroids, faces swollen, eyes wide with terror. Some were mid-sedation, others showed lifeless expressions staring up from makeshift bondage setups. Every image had a corresponding note in Berdella's journal. Tuesday, 3:45 p.m., dose increased, no resistance. Saturday, second application of bleach to eyes, little response, subject fading, prepare for disposal. It was cold, clinical, like reading the diary of a scientist, except the experiments were real and the subjects were human. Police also found newspaper clippings about missing young men, all names that would later match the victims in the Polaroids. But there was one box that chilled even the most seasoned detectives. Inside were severed body parts, tagged and labeled, like trophies, like he wanted to remember exactly what he had done. When Berdella was arrested, he didn't scream, he didn't resist, he didn't show emotion. Instead, he calmly told officers, "I've been expecting this." He was taken into custody and charged immediately. But prosecutors were careful. They knew the depth of the case. They weren't just dealing with a murderer, they were dealing with a sadistic collector of human suffering. Forensic experts spent weeks combing through every inch of Berdella's home. They found bone fragments in the backyard, teeth in envelopes, and his handwritten journals filled with details only the killer could have known. But even with all the evidence, there was one problem: some of the bodies were never recovered. Berdella had disposed of them so effectively, they could only charge him based on photographs, journals, and the testimony of his last would-be victim. Still, the picture was clear: at least 6 men, all dead, at least 20 others, photographed in various stages of abuse, countless more, possibly forgotten. And so instead of going to trial where victims' families would be forced to hear every sickening detail, Berdella took a plea deal. He confessed, not out of guilt, but to avoid the death penalty. Let that sink in. A man who drugged, tortured, and dismembered at least 6 men, a man who recorded every scream and photographed every wound, got life in prison, not death. Many in Kansas City were outraged. The families wanted justice, but prosecutors knew they had to secure a guaranteed sentence, even if it meant giving this monster the luxury of dying behind bars instead of facing execution, and that's exactly what happened. Berdella was sent to Missouri State Penitentiary. He was kept away from the general population, partly for his safety, and partly because no one wanted him near anyone ever again. In letters from prison, he wrote about mistreatment, about unfair conditions. He claimed the media twisted his image. He even asked for sympathy. Imagine that. This man who turned his home into a torture facility, who made human beings his personal science projects, believed he was the real victim. But karma had one more card to play. In 1992, Robert Berdella died suddenly in prison. A heart attack ended his life. No fanfare, no final words, just gone. He never showed remorse, never apologized to the families, never truly explained why, and with him died answers to questions that still haunt investigators. Were there more victims? How many Polaroids were never found? Did he act alone? We may never know, but what we do know is this: his final victim, Christopher Bryson, survived. And by jumping from that window, he didn't just save himself, he stopped a monster. Robert Berdella was dead. Just 4 years into his life sentence, his heart gave out. There was no warning, no riot, no violent end, just one more monster quietly leaving this world the same way he moved through it, without remorse. To some, it felt like justice had finally arrived, but to the families of his victims, it felt incomplete. There was no courtroom closure, no cross-examination, no victim statements, no media trial where the world could confront the evil he brought into their homes. He'd been allowed to die quietly, but the horror he left behind still screamed. The story of Robert Berdella isn't as well known as Dahmer, Bundy, or Gacy, and maybe that's intentional, because there's something especially terrifying about a man who doesn't look dangerous, a man who pays his taxes, runs a business, and smiles at the neighbors, all while keeping bones in his backyard and chains in his bedroom. This wasn't someone who craved fame.
He
didn't write manifestos. He didn't court the media. He just quietly turned his house into a prison, a lab, a graveyard, and expected no one to notice. And for a while, no one did. What makes Berdella even more terrifying is how easily he hid in plain sight. He wasn't reclusive. He ran a public shop. He wasn't angry. He spoke politely. He wasn't messy. He cleaned after every murder like it was part of a routine. If Christopher Bryson hadn't escaped, if one match hadn't burned through those ropes, we might never have known the full truth. And even now, we still don't know how many lives he really took. When police reviewed the Polaroids again years later, they were haunted by how many faces they couldn't identify. Some of those men were never reported missing. Some likely had no families searching. And some, the police believe, were killed so cleanly there was no trace left behind. Berdella chose his victims carefully. Men on the fringes, homeless, addicted, discarded by society. He knew no one would come looking, and that's what makes him one of the most dangerous killers in American history. Yet strangely, his name is almost forgotten. There's no Netflix series, no documentaries, no trending hashtags, just a few archived articles, and a city that remembers with shame, not spectacle. Maybe it's because the story doesn't fit the usual script. There's no charm, no charisma, just a coward with a camera, a journal, and a basement full of unspeakable acts. And that's the legacy of Robert Berdella, a man who treated human life like an experiment, a killer who didn't want attention, he just wanted control, and a story that reminds us that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones who scream, they're the ones who smile. If this case left you shaken, you're not alone. There are too many stories like this, buried, forgotten, silenced, and that's why we tell them. If you want more deep, disturbing, and untold stories like this, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. It helps the algorithm, and it helps us bring more victim stories to light. This is Twisted Minds, and we'll see you in the next one.